Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of Nimh, Chapter 23, Captured. Speaking of schedules and countdowns, Mr. Aegis spoke suddenly. We've got one for this evening, and it's getting late. The clock on Nicodemus's desk said 5 o'clock. Mrs. Fitzgibbon feeds Dragon at 6 p.m. He spoke gently, but his voice had a chilling sound to Miss Frisby. They all looked at her. "I'm ready," she said quietly. "But there are still a few minutes. There's one question you haven't answered. Why did Jonathan never tell me anything about Nimh or any of the rest?" Mr. Aegis said, "I'll try to explain. When Nicodemus and the others moved into the cave near the rose bush, they invited Jonathan and me to stay with them. After all, we had been with them for many months at that time. And at first we did. But after a few weeks, we decided to move out. We were, you realize, different. We both felt strange, associating only with rats all the time, even though they were our close good friends. As for me, I wanted more solitude and less society. Jonathan, on the other hand, was younger than I and felt lonely. So we moved at first together to the basement of the old farmhouse where I still live. Then Jonathan met you at a stream near the woods somewhere, I think he said." "Yes," said Miss Frisby. "From then on, he worried. He didn't want to be secretive, but he didn't know how to tell you one thing. I'm sure Nicodemus had explained to you that the injections we got at Nimh had 2 effects. One of them was that none of us seemed to be growing older. At all. Apparently, the injections had given us all a much longer lifespan than even Dr. Schultz had anticipated. You see why this would have been a dreadful thing for Jonathan to have told you you never had the injections. That meant while he stayed young, you would grow older and older and finally die. He loved you, and he could hardly stand that thought. Yet if it was distressing to him, he thought, how much more painful it was going to be to you. That is what he could not bring himself to tell you. He would have told you eventually. I know he intended to. Indeed, you would have found out yourself. You would have seen it happening, but it was hard. He just kept putting it off, and then finally it was too late." "Poor Jonathan," said Miss Frisby. "He should have told me." "Will my children also have longer lives?" said Nicodemus. "We don't know yet. We think so. Our own children aren't old enough to tell yet. But we do know they've inherited the ability to learn, and they master reading almost without effort." He stood up and looked at the clock. "One more thing," she said. "What happened to Jenner?" Nicodemus said he left. He was against the plan from the start. In our discussions, he tried to persuade others to oppose it too, and a few joined him. There are some others who are still doubtful about it, but they're going to stay with us and try it. The arguments stayed reasonably friendly, but for the last straw for Jenner was that we decided to destroy the machines. Destroy them? For 2 reasons. One, if anyone ever finds the cave, we don't want them to have any evidence of what we've been doing, and nothing but broken bits of metal, debris will just look like ordinary junk to them. We'll pull out our electric cable, our lights, and our water pipes. We'll close up the tunnels leading in. The other reason is more important. When we move to Thorn Valley, we're going to have some hard times. We know this, and we're braced for it. If this cave is still open with machines and lights and running water and carpets, that's going to be terribly tempting for us to just move back. We want to remove that temptation. But when Jenner heard this decision, he grew really angry, and he denounced all of us as idiots and dreamers, and he stamped out of the meeting, taking 6 followers with him. We don't know where they went, but we think they'll try to find some place they can set up a new life like this one. I wish them luck, but they'll have trouble. There won't be any toy tinker this time. They'll have to steal their machines, everything. That worries some of us, because if they get caught, who knows what might happen. But we're going ahead with the plan, and once we get to Thorn Valley, I think we can stop worrying." Justin stood up. It's time to go." He picked up the paper with the sleeping powder in it. Mrs. Frisby, Justin, and Mr. Aegis walked together up the long corridor to the rose bush. "Remember, when you come in through the hole in the kitchen floor," Mr. Aegis said, "you'll be under a cabinet. It's low, but there's room to move. Go a few steps forward, and you'll be able to see out into the room. Mrs. Fitzgibbon will be there getting dinner ready for her family. They eat at about 6. When she's got their dinner ready, she will feed Dragon. He won't be in the kitchen, but he'll be waiting just outside the kitchen door on the porch. She doesn't let him in while she's cooking because he makes such a pest of himself, rubbing against her ankles and getting between her feet. If you look to your right, you'll see his bowl. It's blue and it has the word kitty written over and over around the side. She'll pick it up, fill it with cat food, put it down in the same place. Then, watch closely. She'll walk over to the door to let him in, and that's your chance. Her back will be toward you. She's got to walk about 20 feet. It's a big kitchen. The bowl will be about 2 feet away from you. Be sure the paper packet is open, then dash out, dump the powder in the food, and dash back. You don't want to be in sight when Dragon comes in. I can tell you that from experience. Is that how you got hurt? I got there a few seconds late. I decided there was still time. I was wrong. In the arch, in the rose bush. At the arch in the rose bush, Mr. Aegis left them. With his cast, he would not be able to climb through the hole to the kitchen, so there was no point in him going any farther. Mrs. Frisby and Justin moved out of the rose bush and looked around them. It was still light, though the sun was low on the horizon. Straight ahead of them, perhaps 200 feet away, stood the big white farmhouse. Dragon was already on the porch, sitting just outside the door, looking at it expectantly. To their right was the tractor shed, and beyond that, the barnyard fence and the barn itself, casting a long shadow. Behind them rose the woods and the mountains. To the left, Miss Frisby could see the big stone in the middle of the garden, near which her children waited. As soon as her task was done, she thought she must hurry to them and get ready for the move. We go under the right side of the house, Justin said quietly. Follow me. They made their way around the edge of the yard, staying in the shadows, keeping an eye on Dragon. Justin wore his satchel and had put the powder in it. There was a basement under the main part of the Fitzgibbons' house, but the big kitchen had been added later and stood on a foundation of concrete blocks with only a crawl space beneath. As they approached the gray foundation, Miss Frisby saw that near the middle of it, a few inches off the ground, there was a square patch of darker gray. It was a hole left for ventilation, and there was a screen over it. When they reached it, Justin caught hold of the screen and pulled the corner, and it swung open. We loosened it a bit, he explained, holding it open for her. Miss Frisby crept through. Careful, he said. It's dark. There's a drop of about a foot. Just jump. We put some straw at the bottom so it's soft. Holding her breath, Miss Frisby jumped blindly into the blackness and felt the cushion of straw under her feet. In a moment, Justin landed beside her. They were under the Fitzgibbons' kitchen. Now, he said softly, look to your left. See the patch of light? That's the hole. The light comes from the kitchen. We've piled dirt up under it so it's easy to reach. Come on. Miss Frisby followed him. As they got near the bright hole, she could see around a little. They were walking across the bare earth, dry and cool to the touch. Overhead, there were heavy wooden beams holding up the floor, and above those rose the floorboards themselves. They walked up to this, and Justin whispered, this is as far as I can go. There's not room for me to get through. I'll wait here. Come back down as soon as you're finished. Here's the powder. He handed her the paper packet. Remember to tear it open before you go to Dragon's Bowl. Hurry, I can hear Miss Fitzgibbon moving around. She's getting dinner. Be careful and good luck. Miss Frisby first pushed the packet up through the hole. Then as quietly as she could, grasping both sides, she pulled herself up into the kitchen. It was light there. But Mr. Aegis had not been joking when he said the ceiling was low. There was less than an inch between the floor and the bottom of the cabinet, so that she could not walk properly, but had to flatten herself out and crawl. She did a few steps and discovered that she was trembling. Stay calm, she told herself. Stay calm. Don't get panicky or you'll do something foolish and destroy everything. She crept forward again until she was near the edge of the cabinet. She stopped. From there, she could see into the kitchen fairly well. Straight across from her stood a big white gas stove, and in front of it, putting a lid on a pot, was Mrs. Fitzgibbon. Because the edge of the cabinet was so low, Mrs. Frisby could not see her head, but only up to her shoulders. There, Miss Fitzgibbon said, as if to herself. The stew is done. The bread's in the oven. The table is set. Where's the cat's bowl? Miss Frisby looked to her right as Mr. Aegis had said. There it was, blue with the words inscribed around the side. Yet something was wrong. It was not 2 feet from the cabinet, but more like 4 or 5. In the corner, where it should have been, rose 4 wooden legs. She realized that she was looking at the bottom of a kitchen stool. No matter, she thought. The extra distance is just a couple of feet. Mr. Aegis had not mentioned a stool. She crawled to her right, as close to the bowl as she could get without showing herself, and tore open the package. Just as she did this, Mrs. Fitzgibbon walked over from the stove. Her hand appeared, picked up the bowl, and Miss Frisby heard it thump on the counter over her head. A cutting sound, a can opener, the scrape of a spoon. The bowl was back on the floor. The strong, fishy smell of cat food. Miss Fitzgibbon walked away. Now, Miss Frisby moved swiftly out into the room, across the open floor, holding the powder, her eyes intent on the bowl. She was no longer trembling. She poured the powder, which instantly dissolved in the moist cat food. Still clutching the paper, she turned and sped toward the cabinet. With a bang, the lights went dim. The ceiling, which had somehow become curved, was filled with little round moons. Miss Frisby kept running, and her face struck a cold, hard wall of metal. A voice shouted, "Mother, don't let Dragon in yet. I caught a mouse." Billy, the younger Fitzgibbon son, had been sitting on the kitchen stool, his feet up on the rung, eating berries from a colander. The colander, upside down, was now over Mrs. Frisby.